So the question I get a lot is, how do I pivot? I've pivoted my career 5 times. I've gone from being a school social worker to working in nonprofits, working in higher education, working in local government, working in education tech, and now I work in SaaS. And I won't even go through how many job titles I've had. I've had so many job titles, but my through line has always been workforce development, future of work, meaning either how do I get to people jobs, working directly with people to get jobs, planning. When I worked in the government, it was like understanding what jobs were needed in the future, right? So therefore coming back to teachers and superintendents and saying like this is what our curriculum has to teach people in order for us to be able to meet this need. I've also worked with Fortune 100, 500 companies. So think Google, Meta, Amazon, Delta Airlines, Adyen, JetBlue, you name it, on how they can reframe their interview questions so it's a little bit less exclusive in the way that they are hiring people. So that way we can hire more diverse candidates and ensure that they're successful. And then I've also worked with hiring managers to make sure that when someone is hired, they stay in the job, right? I just spent this first minute and a half talking about my credentials because I have pivoted a number of times. I've helped a number of people pivot. And the question I always get is, well, what degree do I need? What courses do I need? And I would die on this hill. You do not need another course. What you need is to understand your skill set. So if you're someone who's standing in the crossroads of your career and your path behind you, like you've learned so much and you've invested so much, whether that's time, education, whatever, but you know you have to move on, but you're not sure where to move on to. This is why we're here, right? The most common mistake we make here is thinking that we have to start over. You have to go get a new something. You have to start brand new. Like, no, you do not. Everything you need is already part of your journey. What I do in my coaching, what I'm doing here, and I don't know how long this is going to be. So let's say that that's 15 to 20 minutes, maybe longer, is to walk you through exactly how to map out your former journey to where you're going, right? So we're going to do this step by step using the plant, scan, pilot, and launch framework that I read here, and that I've also I just literally read Jenny Blake's Pivot about a month ago. So obviously I haven't used a specific framework in my entire journey in the way that she's mapped it out. But when I was reading, I was like, yes, this is what I've done. And since she already wrote it, I'm going to give her the credit and I'm going to use that framework. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the Plan Scan Pilots launch framework from Jenny. And then we're going to jump into what skills are in demand to understand how to think about a pivot, right? Because without the right process, even the most valuable skills won't get you where you want to go. So first, we're going to walk through the 4 stages of this intentional process, and then we're going to go into the skills of the future so you can see how you can pull out your own skills. All right. Leave questions in the comments as we go along. If as I'm speaking, a thought comes to you and you're like, wait, what is she talking about? What does she mean? Leave a comment in the comment section. If you would want more one-on-one work, head over to the link in the bio description section and we can map it out for your own specific story. Without further ado, let's get into the first one. Plant. Plants is getting grounded before you grow. What this means is that it's about looking inward, right? Before you start looking outward. What a lot of people do is that you're like, oh, I need a new job. And then you start scanning for, oh, what is going to pay me 6 figures? What's going to be remote? And you start jumping into that. And it's like, do you even understand what that job does and how you fit into that? Right. So that's what we need to understand, right? So look honestly inward with kindness to yourself and with kindness and humility and look at what has worked for you. What have you been praised on? What have you been promoted for? What work do you do on a daily basis? Things of that nature, right? It's a pause and it's a moment for you to ask yourself, what am I right now? Like, where am I? What am I? Like, what do I call myself? And what does that mean? Right? Because you want to understand your core skills. You understand how other people understand you and then dig a little bit deeper into that, right? Because if we think like a tree, before you can grow new branches, you have to like you have to get very deeply rooted, right? When you plant a tree or pretty much anything for a while, nothing is happening. But if you're, especially if you put it in water, you're gonna see it's just all these roots growing. You need to understand your roots before we go anywhere else, right? Because these are your core skills, your innate strengths, right? And that value, that's what you start marketing in the marketplace, and that's also what drives you. So we want to understand that, right? Um, and I won't get into this, but what we're really trying to find here, as well as like your zone of genius, like what drives you and also what comes natural to you, right? Because as you move forward in your career, especially if you're going to pivot, you don't want to pivot from hating your job to hating your job. Like, what's the point? You want to make sure that you understand yourself well enough that the next job, no job will be perfect, but at least you get to do more of what you love to do, right? And obviously get paid very well for it, right? So let's bring this to life, right? So if you, let's say you're a teacher, what I hear a lot from teachers is like they mainly just talk about their classroom work, right? You know, I'm a teacher, all I know is the classroom, et cetera, et cetera. But okay, so if all you know is the classroom, let's dig into it, you know? I was raised in the classroom. My mom's a teacher, right? So when we talk about the plants, rooting yourself, what skills have you mastered as a teacher? Right? So so let's talk about communication. You're talking to students, you're talking to their parents, you're talking to your coworkers, you're talking to superintendents, you're talking to guardians, you're talking to so many people, right? You're constantly translating complex ideas for different audiences. You're constantly not only teaching your students, you're also teaching new staff members. So you do this through written communication, emails, lesson plans, feedback. You do this through oral communication, right? You are lecturing, you're teaching, you're facilitating. You have parent-teacher conferences. You are meeting with your principal. You're meeting with your fellow coworkers. All these are highly valuable skills. Right now, if you go and look at any job board, if you pick 10 job descriptions, all of them will talk about how they want a good communicator. And we just established that as a teacher, you have great communication, whether it's written or oral. So already, right? You're planting yourself in something that you're great at, right? Also, project management. As a teacher, you have to plan out your semester, if not your whole year, right? So in my mind, you're a project manager because you're juggling dozens of competing priorities. You're managing timeline, lesson plans, grading, state tests. You're allocating resources. You're guiding a large group of people toward a specific goal, which is learning the specific thing. And all those people have different learning styles and different interests, right? So not only do you have to scaffold your learning, you have to entertain people, you have to manage feelings while keeping everyone on track, especially because in this age that we're living in, by come December or June, there's a test they need to pass. You're a project manager. Every single year is a year-long project and you're breaking it up to be successful, right? And then in order to make all this work, you need to create things, right? So you're creating worksheets. You're creating sophisticated learning, right? You're an expert in how humans acquire new skills, right? You design experiences catered to diverse learning styles and abilities. You create curriculums that take a person from a novice to proficient in a specific time frame. This is exactly what corporate trainers do, or a user experience or UX designer. So, what we've just done is, as a teacher, I've just planted you. We've taken inventory of what you do, and you look at all of it and you realize, wow, let me expand myself from the label of teacher. I'm a communicator. I'm a what do we just what do we just say? I'm a communicator. I'm a project manager. I'm a learning designer, right? So now that you have all of this, you can now move on to the second part, which is scan. This is where you explore possibilities without commitment. So now that you understand that you're a learning designer, you're a communicator, you're a project manager, it doesn't mean start applying for all these jobs. No, it means learn a little bit more, right? Now that you know what your skills, now that you know what your core skills are, you can start looking around and figuring out, what do I actually want to do? I had a meeting with a client the other day, and they were like, "Oh, I want to be a customer success manager because I heard you talk about it." And I was like, "Okay, let's dig into it." And by the end of it, we realized that she probably doesn't want to do it. Right? So just because you hear the skill sets and you're like, "Yes, I match these skill sets," does not mean you probably want that responsibility, right? So you want to explore, right? This is a time of if you like leaning into curiosity, leaning into joy. You're not putting any real like, "Oh my gosh, I must do this." You're not jumping into any degrees or anything, right? You're I, please don't just jump and get a new certification. Just give it time. Cálmate, okay? Tranquilo. Okay. I got carried away. Let's bring it back. I feel very passionate about this because I really dislike when people you learn something and you just want to jump into certification because you're wasting time and you're wasting money. I want you to like realize you even like this thing first. Anyway, so what you want to do here is follow the curiosity. And this might look like if you love, and we're going to keep the teacher theme, right? If you love curriculum building, part of that is like, okay, where else is that done? Right? So you start searching for terms like this is when you become like a thesaurus, if you will. You start trying to identify what does curriculum building, right? What does that mean in other industries? And what do other people call this? And what does that actually mean, right? So that can be instructional design, that could be corporate trainer, that could be learning and development. And each of those means slightly different things depending on which industry you're in and which company you're in. Because, for example, I am in the learning and development world. I am a corporate trainer. I am a change manager, but I am external. So I'm in a consultancy wing in tech, right? I talked to this other woman who was looking for a new job and she works at a probably one of our favorite companies, but I won't name it. But she's a learning and development internally, right? So she's teaching the internal staff learning and development. So what do you want? I don't like internal work. I prefer to be a consultant, right? So you need to learn that about yourself. And as you do this, start reading those job descriptions, right? And then see the phrases and understand what you understand and what you don't understand. Right. So when you see something like stakeholder management, you might think, oh my gosh, I don't know what that is, but you do. Right. Because stakeholder management is that you are working with parents and school administrators. So on your resume, rather than talking about how you navigate parent teacher night and how you send emails to parents on a weekly basis, you say you keep stakeholders abreast weekly through email communication. You are doing this, you're just changing the language. Do you understand? When you see content creation, when you see in-person training, you've done that. That's lesson planning, that's teaching, right? So what you're doing here is you're learning the vocabulary of the next chapter and what that actually looks like. And then you want to start seeing what keeps popping up when you're looking for all these, what keeps popping up for you, right? Because you want to understand what deep rooted skills you have are going to be relevant in the future so you can lean in on those more, right? So the skill of learning design is the bedrock of user experience, for example. How do you teach someone to navigate a new app intuitively? Right? When someone rolls out a new product, for example, right now we have different LLMs, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, DeepSeek, Grok. All these things are popping out on a daily basis, and as we figure out the stronghold, someone is going to have to teach the masses how to use it. So if you're a learning designer, you can either go into learning design and teach people that, or you can go to UX. I hope you're following me here. And please, in the comments, if you're following me, write yes. Like, let me know what your understanding is of this. Let me know how you're translating it for yourself. I had a client the other day and I was explaining one of the roles that she was interested in. And she's like, and she's a social worker. She's like, oh, this is just cognitive behavioral therapy. But in the corporate world, I said, yes, exactly. You get it. So in the comments, please let me know how you're translating in your head. And if you're not getting it too, that's totally fine. Like, let me know what you're doing and we can work together on that. Right. And when we talk about things like scanning, we also want to like root in communication, right? The skill of communication is a secret weapon right now with AI because AI prompt engineering is how do you learn how to communicate with the AI properly so you're not producing AI slop. and you're producing quality AI outputs that are clear, that have context, and that have nuance, and people aren't just going to scroll by or ignore. And then lastly, in your scanning, and again, we're in the second phase, which is scanning, which is exploring the possibilities without committing. So the last part I want you to do is first you followed your curiosity, you've looked at different job descriptions, are translating the language for your new skills, you're looking at emerging fields. Now, I want you to start doing informational interviews. Find people on LinkedIn who have the titles that you keep seeing pop up and that you're interested in. You're not asking them for like give me a job. You're purely getting information. You're showing your curiosity in them and in their work. And you're kind of circling that back to show like, hey, I'm the type of person who puts in the work to get what I want. I'm the type of person that if you are so moved by this conversation, if you were to hire me, I will make sure that I get my work done and I will learn, right? I had a client once who was just like, no one wants to hire me because no one wants to train. Okay. If you've identified that no one wants to train people anymore, I'm not saying this is right, but if you've identified that, then your job is in interviews to show that you are able to learn. And once you get in there, they're going to train you. Once they hire you, they're not going to like let you fail. They're not going to fire you either because it's way more expensive. If they've already identified in you that you have the skill sets, either you train naturally, like talking to your coworkers, doing the job, right? So if you identify something, then work it into your narrative to be in your favor. Don't just be like, oh, no one wants to train anyone anymore. And then you just like not improve the way that you're interviewing. Do informational interviews, figure out what you need to learn, and then bring it up in your actual real interview and be like, I learned blah, blah, blah. I'm going to hire that person. And you would too, right? So the scan phase ends when you have a few interesting, tangible paths that resonate with your core skills. So if you're an educator now, you're thinking, I see a connection between my skills and the world of corporate training and instructional design. Then you can go to the third phase, which is pilot. This is when you start running small experiments. Now, this is the most crucial and often skipped step. Excuse me. You wouldn't buy a house without an inspection, right? You wouldn't like um or even now, like even though we buy clothes online, usually if you're buying something online right now, you're looking for a return policy. The reason why we love Amazon, even though it's like, oh my gosh, Amazon's not great, is because we know that if we get something from Amazon and it's not to our liking, we can return it. Right? We are hesitant as a society to commit to things without knowing that we can back out a little bit. And if we can't back out, we're going to do some research. You need to do the same thing. Do not leap into a career, leap into a pivot without fully understanding what's happening. Right? So when you do this third stage of piloting, third stage of piloting, what you're doing is you're designing little things to get data. Right? The question you're answering in this stage is, do I actually enjoy the daily reality of this work? And can I be successful at it? Right. So if we go back to our educator who's now looking at a career in instructional design because they've done the second step, which was scanning, and they've said, this is what I want to do. Here's some possible pilot projects that our educator can do. Our educator can volunteer for cross-functional projects at their current job. Maybe their school district is rolling out a new software system and they can volunteer to create the training guides or run the workshop for other teachers so they can like understand, how to do this effectively. And now you can even put that on your resume. You can talk about it in your interviews, right? You can take one highly specific online course, not a whole master's degree, not a whole whatever, right? You're taking a certification, like let's say you're learning a software like Articulate, right, which is what a lot of e-learning uses, to see if you enjoy the work of building this skill. And I won't get into this right now, but there are so many ways you can get these things for free. Okay? If you absolutely have to pay for a course, by all means, if you're super, like I have to do this, do that. But what's the word I'm looking for? Not commend. I would advise you. This is C word I'm looking for, but I can't remember it. I would advise you to look at your community college. Either they're doing low cost or free, especially if it's an emerging technology. Like, for example, I got my UX design certification for free because when I got it, it was an emerging field and they needed more people in that. So one of the I'm from New York City, and they were doing, if you applied for a program, you can get the certification for free. It was like a 12 or 16-week course. I don't remember. But it was for free. You had to show up and all this good stuff. And I got that. So find something similar for you, right? And or do a small freelance project. This could be a local business, a nonprofit, your church, something like create like a employee handbook, um, or like change a current employee handbook into an e-learning module, right? Because this tests your skills a bit more. And as you're doing that, you're also getting familiar with the tools. So I didn't mention this, but earlier we were talking about for the scanning phase, right? Yeah, the scanning phase, you were looking at job descriptions. In those job descriptions, you probably kept seeing specific tools that were popping up, maybe Loom, Articulate, Articulate. Um, Literally everything is coming out of my head right now. There's super popular ones that like I see them in my brain, but for some reason, anyway, you will keep seeing certain things pop up. It is your job. There's one that's really bothering me because it's right at the tip of my tongue. I don't want to pause the video to like figure it out. Anyway, you're gonna keep seeing different LMS systems, and it's your job to start learning those, right? But you don't have to learn them all at once. If you do small projects, you can learn it that way. So after running a pilot, and you have real data, you might discover I absolutely love using this software. I absolutely love asking people these questions and then building this and delivering it. I feel great. I want to do this. Or you might say, actually, the same for me. I hate that like people don't know what they want, and I need to spend so much time in the discovery phase to even figure out what I'm even designing, what I'm building. I hate that like um it's a lot of sales when you're doing corporate training and learning, because you have to really figure out what's in it for the learner, because they're adult learners, right? And then they're like, if I'm not seeing the direct benefit, I'm not going to do it. So there's a lot that comes out of this, but the goal is clarity, not perfection. And then our fourth one is launch, right? This is where you're scaling what works. So the launch stage is not just a blind leap into now applying. It's confident because now you have projects, you have insight, you have the language of the new industry that you're pivoting to, the new job that you're pivoting to, right? So now when you're updating your resume, your LinkedIn, etc., you have tangible things that you can actually say, and you're confident even in yourself because you're no longer a super novice. You can actually talk the talk and walk the walk, right? So if we were going back to our educator whose pilot project that they were doing, they're able to transform their personal branding. So their resume, their LinkedIn profile goes from like uh I'm an experienced high school teacher, or I'm an experienced math teacher, whatever it is that they had on their profile before. And now their headline says, I'm a learning experience designer who transforms complex information into engaging educational content. Go off. Yes, we love this for them, right? They've now positioned themselves to where they're going, not where they're coming from. Because if you keep putting your old title everywhere, then people are going to see you as your old self. Put your new title. Stand in the new you, right? And then start crafting your story, right? Now that you have the projects that you've done, the conversations that you have, your resume can reflect that story. When you start having interviews, rather than like be like, I don't know. No, you can say, I've spent, all this time, 10 years plus mastering learning design in the classroom, and I recently applied those skills to XYZ project that you did, which resulted in me helping the company onboard their new hires 30% quicker. So I'm excited to bring those same results and that same love for learning and experimentation and innovation, that's the word I'm looking for, to your company, because I know you're doing, and then you talk about some of the research that you learned about that company, right? So this is how you strategically pivot. You don't discard your past, you don't ignore it, you don't run straight into the fire. You meld it all together, right? You honor it, you translate it, you test it, and then you launch from it, right? So again, the framework is plant, scan, pilots, and launch, right? And Plant is you're identifying your core skill sets. Scanning is you're exploring what's out there. Piloting is you're testing it out through small projects or a course if you must. And then launching is now you're applying, you're interviewing. Okay. So now that we have this mapped out, you know how to find your roots in the plant stage. You know how to explore what's possible with the scan stage and how to test it, your ideas in the pilot. The next thing you might be thinking about, or you might say it's like, okay, I may have I may want to do this and I understand the concept, but like I don't even know what's out there. I don't even know how to like start thinking about this. So let's get a little bit deeper into our skills, right? Or the skills of the future. Let me reframe that. Let's get into the skills of the future, right? And this is becoming a really long video, so take a break if you need it. um but let's dive into the skills of the future, right? What are the timeless human skills that are your roots and are emerging? And as I mentioned earlier, I started out as a school social worker. So I went to Trader Joe's earlier, and the guy was making small talk, and I had my do I have it with me? No, I don't have it. I had my school raincoat on, and I went to BC. And he was like, BC's Boston College. And he was like, oh, are you still doing what you studied? And I was like, in a way, yes, because my undergrad was in human psychology and, oh my God, applied psychology and human development. And my master's was in social work. And I will stand 10 toes down that my social work skills have been the reason why I've been able to pivot so much and why I'm thriving in tech, right? Because I have deep human skills. Now the video is already kind of longer than I would like, so I'll just go through, or maybe I'll do a part three. I'll do a part three. So tomorrow I'll talk about the enduring soft skills that you need, as well as the hard skills. You know, the new branches that you can build in order to make this successful, right? Um, so yeah, I'll do that just so we can pause, so it's not another another 30 minutes. But I want you to start thinking about this right now. Think about the framework I just shared with you earlier and follow this channel because I really want to build a roadmap for your intentional career pivot. And I'm building a library for real strategies to help you, right? To be clear and confident. And just to reiterate, today we went over the plant, scan, pilots, and launch framework from Jenny Blake. Alrighty. I hope to see you tomorrow. And I hope to see you in the comments. Like, let me know what you're thinking, your thoughts, your own pivots, what you don't understand, what you do understand. If there were if there were any aha moments, all of it. All right. See you tomorrow.